Place to call it. Yeah, here, jump into the Discord. So I had a caller who saw my conversation on, um, Neil deGrasse Tyson talking to Ben Shapiro about trans rights, science. Yeah, just hop into the forum channel. It's an open channel. Um, so yeah, so they wanted they I guess you saw that and you wanted to talk something about it. I'm not sure exactly what your perspective was, but yeah, I like Collins. Um, Here, let me. Oh, you got it. Okay. Can you hear me?
Hey, I can hear you. Hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're welcome to put your video on if you would like, but there is no obligation whatsoever.
Okay, yeah. I mean, you might not be able to see me anyway. I'm kind of like in the dark and stuff,
Yep,
and
it's fine. Just literally
just
just
walk.
offering. Yeah. um,
Cool, thank you. If I was on my PC outside streaming and stuff, I might have, but I'm just kind of like watching my kids right now.
mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I was watching your video, and I was just, one of the things is I try to look for more like left-leaning people to talk to, but I keep running into this weird problem. I don't know what it is, but they're very intimidated to have like open like public
Mm,
discussions for some reason. And I don't know, maybe part of it is because they see me as maybe like a blood sports type of
mm,
debater guy, but I mean I don't view myself that way. That I think they just have this general type of view of like maybe conservative or like right leaning people like, oh, they're all like Ben Shapiro, they all want to like talk fast and just be like the facts, facts, facts and all this stuff. But I try to have more of like an organic conversation where I have an open mind to where perhaps there's something I could learn, um, or I could change my mind, have my mind changed, you know? So that's kind of like the position I take when I have these conversations. Yeah.
yeah, that sounds great. I can definitely I can be your doctor and diagnose your issues if you just
Okay.
talk to me about trans rights, trans topics. Then
Yeah.
I'll get
Yeah.
my own share, and then I can I can give you a diagnosis.
Okay. Or what's do you want to? Well, okay. I guess my first question would be like, what is transphobia? Like, what
mm.
is how
Mm-hmm.
would is there like a way you can define it so that it's kind of easy to understand and yeah, because I
Yeah.
kind of hear it thrown around loosely, to where I feel like there's people are being accused of being transphobic in ways where it doesn't seem to fit the definition. So I just want to
Mm-hmm.
know what your definition is, or yeah.
Yeah, so I'll say my definition, and then if we want, we can go more into definitions that I've seen used. But I'm
Mhm.
happy to give first just my kind of personal view on it, which won't necessarily cover all views out there, whatever. So for me,
Yeah.
transphobia is kind of defined structurally similarly to homophobia, where I think it actually encompasses two somewhat differing, um, I would say like viewpoints on it. Like it's got kind of two structures within it that are both somewhat distinct. So transphobia or homophobia can be simply like feeling like in the case of homophobia that gay people, or in transphobia trans people um, are um, degenerate and destroying this country, and they need to be eradicated, or at least they shouldn't be visible in public. They shouldn't necessarily have the same rights as everyone else. And they are probably up to no good, right? That's like one view of what transphobia could be, of what a transphobic person could be, or what it could mean to feel some kind of transphobic tendency. I think there's a more kind of theoretical definition, so less applied but more kind of abstract view of what transphobia could be, or what, in the same way as what homophobia structurally could mean, is it's like a kind of personal feeling of uncomfort with the idea of, in terms of homophobia, two people who are of the same sex having some kind of romantic or sexual relationship, or your own feelings that might feel related to that. I have a moment. I look across the bar,
I'm
and
sorry, you cut out a bit.
oh, can you
Um,
hear me now?
could you repeat that last part? I didn't
Yeah, yeah. So
hear.
I can actually
My
make this
signal.
abstract. I can make
Huh?
this abstract thing pretty concrete, which is, if you are at a club or a bar or something and you spot somebody out of the corner of your eye and you look over and you're like, oh wow, they're super attractive. If you realize, if say you're a man and then you realize that they're a man and you're like angry, right? You're upset. Maybe you're angry toward them. You're angry at yourself. You're angry at something. You feel embarrassment, disgust, some kind of pain. I would say
I'm
that
sorry. For whatever reason, it's like cutting in
it's
and
cutting
out.
out a
Let
lot.
me.
Yeah. See what you can do.
Okay. Hello.
Yep. How am I coming through now? It looks like
There.
it's
Oh,
good on my end. Thank you. No nonsense.
okay. I just need a little reset, I guess.
Yeah. Okay. Let me know if it
Uh,
cuts out again. But yeah,
yeah.
here I'll quickly go through this example.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Yeah. Perfect. So you're in a bar, club. You see somebody. You're like, oh, cool. That person's attractive. Like, maybe I'll go talk to them. And then you realize you're a man. They're a man. And you realize, oh my god, like that was a gay moment. I was tricked into having a gay moment or something like that. I was attracted to somebody. I found out they're a man, and you feel disgust or fear or anger toward them or yourself. I would say that that's homophobia. And in the same way, if you realize that somebody's trans, that's transphobia. Or if you had a moment where you were like, could I be trans? Um, and it's like, oh God, some kind of conspiratorial thinking that these people are trying to turn me into something. I would say that those are all things that I would put under the umbrella of transphobia, but obviously in very different ways. A personally felt transphobia or homophobia is like a you issue. That's something that you suffer from, that you have to deal with, that you experience in your life. I don't
Okay.
morally judge somebody for having some
Well,
kind
the
of
reason
emotional
why I
reaction, but I would morally judge somebody for wanting to keep a certain type of people out of public life, um, you know, because of some
oh,
inbuilt whatever, right? If it's
okay,
political,
well,
maybe that's different. I don't know. But for being
the
gay or
only
for being
reason I ask
trans, yeah.
is because like if it's like a message you want to convey to people like on a mass scale, right? To the normies, right? Who may not be as involved as we are in topics like this. Like it would be easier to have kind of like an easy definition um to kind of go by, like homophobia is kind of easy because it's like it's like a dislike or distrust of someone who is attracted to the same sex. That's like a pretty straightforward.
Oh, now you're
Like
cutting out a bit.
um yeah, it
I
seems
think
like
you're good
transphobia
now. Okay.
is a lot more complicated to define.
Interesting. So, okay, this is interesting. So, from
I'm
my
sorry, did you cut
perspective,
out?
yeah, can you hear me okay?
Huh.
See if there's anything you can do with
Okay, I guess I
your
lost you for a bit.
headphones or phone. Can you hear me now?
Maybe I'll try this.
All right, testing, testing. How we doing?
Okay, testing. There you. Yeah,
Okay,
that's
very good.
better.
Okay,
You
so
talked up for a
yeah,
bit.
so from my perspective, homophobia, transphobia are almost, I'm not going to say 100%, but to a very large degree, you can really swap them out. They're structurally like basically the same.
Well, the reason why I would say they aren't is because a gay like a homosexual person is easier to define than a trans person.
Um, maybe, maybe.
Maybe
I
you don't think that's true?
um, Sexual identity versus gender identity. Um, it's
A lot more
difficult for me to
complicated.
say which one is like simpler. Maybe sexual identity is simpler than gender identity. I could see
I
arguments
would
for
say
that,
so.
but I don't think either is particularly simple.
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, sim one is more simple than the other. Definitely, I like objectively. I think, right? I mean, because on one hand, we just have like there's nothing different about a gay man other than the preference for the same sex, right? So that's an easy definition to what it is to be
Sure.
gay. But,
Sure. So
but then,
so
yeah,
in the
yeah,
same way, so if you're talking about so really if you limit the conversation to binary trans people, then that's really equivalent. So somebody who was assigned male at birth, who is a woman, or someone who's assigned female at birth, who's a man. That's just as straightforward. You're talking about if you don't limit it to the binary, but then there are bi people, and so there are non-binary people, and right. So if you don't limit it
right.
to the binary in either case, then you have like a lot more different
Right.
situations.
So we're just trying to nail down like what is the definition of transphobia, right? And but so then we saw the distinguish there's a difference between homophobia is much easier to define, and that's why I'm not
Well, okay,
purposely
wait, wait,
like
wait.
trying to
So
eliminate that.
so let's so I think we're hitting our first pain point in the conversation, right? So what do you think about my definitions? Because you say they're hard to define, I defined them. What do you feel about mine? Do you feel
So,
like they make sense? Do they fit? Are they right? Like,
I feel like I feel like the definitions you gave, they don't necessarily cover, let's say, a person who's concerned about trans um, trans people competing in sports, for instance. It doesn't seem like your definition
I don't think
of
that person is
transphobia.
necessarily transphobic.
Gotcha. Okay, well that's good. I'm glad we
I
agreed
think I
there.
think probably almost all of them are, but you wouldn't have to be
Mm.
necessarily.
Okay, but I mean,
Yeah.
we would be
But that's like an
charitable
empirical
enough.
question, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, I just noticed that within your definition that the people who would be concerned about, trans competitors in sports, for instance, wouldn't fall under that category. So like, but at the same time, we see a lot of those people get labeled as transphobic, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I've seen somebody who said that who isn't, but I'm not going to say that they aren't out there,
How
right?
about like Destiny, for instance? He's much more pro trans than I would say I am, but at the same time, he's maintaining the argument that perhaps trans women do not belong in women's sports for the obvious biological advantages.
Yeah, so for someone like Destiny, um, I have actually a lot of disagreements when it comes to trans issues and
Okay.
LGBTQ issues in general. I wouldn't say that he's coming from a place of transphobia. I feel like he genuinely, in good faith, is trying to figure out
What do you
how
mean?
different people's needs can be met. Um, I don't like agree with where he's concluded with everything, but I don't think he's coming from a place of transphobia. But when you say the
Okay.
obvious biological differences,
Yeah.
um, I find that to be a fact that's in contention.
Really? Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Interesting. Which part? Like, would like if I were to say on average, um, on the averages, because that's what I go by, right? I would never look at like the exceptions to the rule, like, or the niche cases, or
Well,
the
first of all, that's not even valid, right? Because we do look at the exceptions, right? That's where a lot of this comes from. So, for example, the concern over trans people in sports has bled over to concern around cis women in sports. So, um, there was a runner. I think there were a number of different athletes who were cis women who tested with a very high testosterone level, and because they were winning and they had a high testosterone level and they were competing in a women's category and they were cis women, they were asked to take hormone suppressants to reduce their testosterone. So I think when you say we can't talk about the outliers, I mean, the outliers are, I mean, trans people in general are outliers. Most people aren't trans. Most competitions don't have a ton of trans people in them. This is a niche topic, right? This is something that's about outliers. So I don't think it's valid to say, like, disregard
well,
the outliers, right?
I just the way I kind of approach it through like a utilitarian viewpoint where um just because the outliers are there doesn't mean we would necessarily structure society around the um the outliers, right?
Okay, so that's a fair point. So in what way would you say allowing trans people, so a trans woman or a trans man, let's say they're binary for the sake of argument, so they're just binary trans, trans woman, trans man, to compete in whatever gender category that they are in, just in the rest of their lives, to allow them into that sports category. That's not rearranging society to fit trans people. To rearrange would be to say, oh hey, let's have another category that's just for trans people or something like that, right? Which is another thing
Not even
that's been
society.
proposed, right?
Let's say that there's like 10 women on a basketball team or what have you,
Sure.
right? And then you have one trans woman, and on the opposing team, and the team of all cis women just feels like it's unfair, like it
Mm-hmm.
because they're the they're the majority in this case.
Mm-hmm.
Is their feeling of unfair competition not valid because we want to recognize, because we want to make comfortable the one trans person? Or do you see what
I
I'm
see what you're
saying?
saying.
Like,
So I would say feelings are valid always, but it doesn't mean that whatever those feelings are telling you that this is how the world should be, that's how the world should be. So let me give you, I think, a pretty clear counterexample. Somebody who is racist toward black people might feel uncomfortable if there are black people near them. Does that mean that black people shouldn't be free to move about in society? No.
well,
The feelings could be valid, they could be genuinely felt, but it doesn't say anything about how we should organize society.
could I point out where those two
Wait,
examples are not
Don't tell
integral
me
though?
don't tell me why they're different. Tell me whether you generally believe that somebody's feelings about how the world should be are how the world should be.
Well, it's not just a feeling. Basically, like if you, I mean, I compete in esports, right? Well, I
Okay,
did
cool.
compete in the
Can I
FGC for like a long
can I
time.
ask what esport?
Fighting games
Oh,
mostly,
cool. Like
FGC. Yeah, like
Tekken, Soul
Marvel
Calibur.
versus Capcom
Oh,
2.
oh shit. I think I
Yeah,
played that
kind of
one.
like,
I played the
yeah,
story
that's
mode,
like,
and there was like you would fight somebody, and then you would talk to them once you win.
oh no, Marvel 2. It was old school. It came out like in 2000, so it's like a
Hmm.
very old. They didn't have advanced story modes or anything yet.
Hmm.
But I played later, like Street Fighter, like Third Strike, and
Oh, okay, cool. So
I dabbled in some of the new games.
sorry to derail, but yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah,
But yeah, so
yeah,
you're in esports leagues. You're playing.
yeah, and you know, those were. I forgot where I was going with this. But just on the esports thing, like when you're being cheated, right? Like when something unfair is happening, you have to call it out because
Hmm.
you just feel like you need to. So feeling like you're being cheated, and if you know the rules, then you can know when when your feeling of being cheated is correct, right?
Well,
So
so okay, so let me
say
just sorry to interrupt, but I want to make this very incisive. Um, is it like feeling like somebody you're playing against is cheating is can be often a great indication that they are cheating, but that would never be the evidence that would be used to determine whether somebody is cheating. Correct in esports.
right,
Yeah,
exactly.
you would
So,
need
but I'll get
some.
that's
Yeah. Hmm.
I was going to tie it all back
Okay.
to my point. So basically, if the cis women are playing and they're like, okay, I it is my understanding when I joined this women's basketball league or whatever that I would only be competing against other women, and now all of a sudden that because trans people have taken woman to mean something more that you feel in your head more than what your biology says about you. Suddenly you're competing in the cis woman's head, she's competing against a man, and
Sure.
that's
Yeah.
the feeling that she feels is unfair because it says women's league. Why am I playing against a man in the women's league? That's so that is that feeling of unfair, is that not a real feeling in that case?
No, it's totally valid to have that feeling, but again, you know, unless your argument is that in general it's valid to say I'm having this feeling, therefore you should arrange society for me. Unless
No,
that's your
no,
argument, I don't see
no,
the
that's not
connection.
my argument.
Okay.
Is that this person has a perfectly has a perfect understanding of the rules, right? And the rule is that it's a woman's league, meaning men
Hmm.
cannot play in it.
Hmm.
So if now she finds herself playing against a man, she knows according to the rules that she is
Well, she feels
experiencing
differently
cheating.
from the league, right? What do you do when a player feels that they have an understanding of the rules and comes to a different understanding than the ref? What do you usually go with?
Well, it's more complicated than that actually. It's that the rules kind of changed overnight in a way to where it used to mean woman used to just mean, cis woman up until,
Sure.
yesterday,
I,
whatever,
I
and
mean,
in
I
most
hate to.
people's minds, but
Yeah, I hate to.
we're talking about average people. I understand. In my mind,
Sure.
I know that they've been around for a while, but um, yeah, I think in the
Sure.
average person, awareness is a lot shorter than ours,
Sure.
to be fair.
Just to I wasn't intending to tie this back in this way, but just because this is where the argument has led us, it was the case
Mm.
that sports leagues didn't allow black people to play in them, and black people weren't considered people. And the feelings of a player on a now integrated team or somebody in an integrated school, they could be valid. They could be real feelings of fear, even, right? It could be valid to feel fear of somebody you're unfamiliar with or some group of people that you have a bad feeling toward. Like those feelings can be
That's an
valid,
irrational
but
fear, though.
but not even looking at whether it's rational or whatever. It's just it's not the case that we do that anymore in
That's a
those
different right.
circumstances. And I'm I think you need to dive into more kind of some other content to try to say why these feelings of these people is what we should base things on rather than something more, I don't know, rather than something else. Because we, in general, don't say, well, these players, right? Because you can imagine saying, okay, wow, these baseball players, they were uncomfortable with having black people on the team, and that's changed overnight, right?
Well,
Everything that
how
you're
about
saying, those arguments wouldn't be valid in that context, right? So I think the
no, but
form of your argument
right.
needs to be examined, right? That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's the same circumstance or anything like that.
Okay, well, let's say let me maybe make a different example that would make give feelings a little more credit here. So,
Okay. Oh, interesting. I'm surprised that you're
yeah,
going in that direction, but I'm interested and curious to hear.
yeah. So So let's take the example, and this has happened. I'm sure you probably already heard of it. The like trans woman MMA fighter who,
Hmm.
was pummeling these biological women, and so to the biological woman,
Oh, so sorry.
and
This
they
is just
have.
something. This is just something I want to note. Just for we can go into more detail further. But I've noticed a few times you're using language that I can see why people are reacting, because
Oh,
biological women versus women. They see
cis.
them as a
I'm
man.
sorry,
Things
cis.
like that.
Whatever.
I'm not even like taking this moment to argue with you about that. I'm just noting that that's where probably you'll get caught up in general. And I think we should probably talk about later because you were interested in that, but I'm just noting it right now. I'm not calling you
Oh,
out
I'm
or
I'm
anything.
saying in like
I'm simply noting it.
in the right. I'm saying simply I get very little engagement with people from the left on any topic. It doesn't
Hmm.
really matter
Oh,
what the
okay,
topic is.
interesting. Ooh, so it's a
Yeah.
it's a it's a deeper issue with you. Okay, let's
Well,
see if we can get to the
here's
core
the
of it.
thing. The thing that I think it was that I had a couple public debates with Fanatic. I think we both know him, and it really didn't go well for him. I think, and which is
Mm.
why he never published them on his YouTube or anything. But people kind of got a taste of I guess, my debate style or whatever, and
Mm.
ever since then, it's been like nobody wants to. Maybe I don't know what it is. Maybe they're too intimidated by me, or that's the sense I get. But I could be full of myself. I
Interesting.
don't know.
Okay,
But yeah,
I'm noting that down on my notepad. Okay.
yeah. So so anyway, so let's say back to my example I was getting. So let's say we have a woman, cis woman MMA fighter, and she's been in the game for years, and she's got a lot of experience under her belt and what have you, right?
Hmm.
And she comes up against a trans woman fighter, and she's getting pummeled. And this is one of a true statement from one of the victims of this trans woman was basically,
Ooh, I
I have
wouldn't.
never.
Okay, I am going to interject. I probably
The
wouldn't
reason
say
why I say
victim in
victim,
this circumstance.
the
That's
reason why I
that's
say
pretty
victim
loaded.
is
It's
because
pretty charged.
well, hold on, because they were taken to the hospital after, so it is kind
Sure,
of
sure, but
like
that's not dispositive of anything, right? Are people
it kind
sometimes
of.
taken to the hospital after MMA matches? That's not an
Sure.
exclusively like trans on cis violence, right? So,
Okay, I
okay,
guess
so here's actually just a tip for you: be careful about making arguments that you can't support because sometimes you'll
okay,
get
sure.
somebody who comes after you for it. Yeah.
The reason, well, I guess it's just my subjective reasoning that I feel like she's a victim. So because
Mm,
I feel like a
interesting.
man beating on a woman makes the woman a victim automatically. So that's just like my,
Ooh. Okay.
you know,
Interesting.
yeah, yeah. I feel like
Transphobia,
any woman.
sexism. Let's pile up the diagnoses. I'm just kidding.
Well, no,
I'm
even
not kidding, but I'm saying it. I mean it in a pleasant way.
I'm just saying, I think that if a woman is beaten brutally by a man, I feel like she is a victim of an unfair circumstance. It just
What
I
what
feel
if
like the
what if she
law
came at him
already
with a gun
determines that
and
way.
had shot his family?
Um,
We're going a little
well,
off
the
road,
thing
but
is, the thing is, we do have like the law in place to deal with things like that, and that
so you would say
I'm
if it's if
especially
there's nothing
against.
illegal, then it's you wouldn't frame it that way.
Put it this way, like
Mm.
you know who that Gary Pluchet is.
Gary Pluchet, no, I'm not familiar.
He's the guy who, I don't know. This is an old story, but this is a guy, a karate instructor. He molested this dude's son, and when this guy
Okay.
found out about it, he went down to the courthouse. He got tipped off. I guess some of his drinking buddies were cops, and they
Hmm.
knew that they would be hauling. They caught this guy, and they
Hmm.
were hauling him into the courthouse. And Gary Pluchet is just camping at a phone booth.
Uh huh.
And as soon as he sees this guy coming by, he does a 360 no scope and gets him in the head. Just shoots him dead.
Hmm.
And his friends are like, Gary, why? Gary, why? And you know, he was actually, they let him walk because the jury just did not agree. They really didn't like pedophiles, so they
Sure.
actually
I mean, that's
they actually
vigilante
yeah.
justice. Is that
It
something you're in favor
is
of?
vigilante. It's
Vigilante
not
violence?
generally, but in this case, it's kind of like this.
Hmm.
I'm not. I don't agree with it, but I understand. That's basically my stance.
Oh, sure. I mean, that's an understandable stance. I can imagine being
Hmm.
so enraged by a personal circumstance that I break the law and like
Hmm.
I can imagine some taken scenario, whatever. Right? Okay,
Hmm.
like
Right. So
that's
I don't agree
understandable.
with it because,
But you do
but
think
I've
it should
never
be
seen.
illegal, right? You respect the
Sure.
rule of law.
Right. I would
Okay,
prefer that we
interesting.
have law than vigilante justice, but at the same time, I understand why vigilante
Hmm.
justice happens.
Sure. Okay,
Yeah.
that's fair. Yeah. So
Um,
how does
about
that
this
connect back
fighter,
then? Or
yeah.
I guess
Well,
sorry, I've been interrupting you. Please finish your example.
that's
Um,
okay. Anyway, so like the cis woman fighter has experience fighting other women,
mhm.
and she notices a comparable difference when fighting this trans woman.
Okay.
She's feels like she's being tossed around like a rag doll. She's being hit harder than she says and she's ever been hit in her whole career fighting.
Hmm.
And it's just jarring how hard these hits are pummeling her in the head. And um, on average, the studies find that men have about 60% more upper body strength. We got bigger lung capacity, much more bone density. It just seems like like combat sports seems like an automatic no-brainer when it
Hmm.
comes to something like trans athletes. And I feel like when a woman feels like, I should only be fighting other women, and when she's being hit so hard and being tossed around so easily by a trans woman, and she's feeling like it's unfair, are those feelings still like not valid even though her experience tells her that this is not a woman
Sure.
she's fighting?
I think I understand what you're saying. I'm going to ask just a clarifying question. Do you feel like that
Mhm.
general format that if an athlete, or let's say a fighter specifically, if a fighter feels like whoever they're fighting, there's just like something wrong. This is so imbalanced that there's something like unusual and probably like untoward occurring here. Oh, maybe they're doping, right?
Right.
Is that generally something that like leads to this conclusion, or is this
Pretty much.
specific
Yeah,
to
like
a woman feeling this way?
it's more specific. Like if I were to find an analogy, I would go with the doping analogy because it's the
Hmm.
closest thing
Hmm.
we have to,
Yeah.
but it doesn't even cover the whole story.
Two cis men are having an MMA fight. One feels like, wait a minute, what the fuck, right?
Right.
Right?
But
Maybe
that's
this
not
person
even.
is doping, right? Would that be
Mhm.
valid as well, or is it literally just this very specific
It's
circumstance
even
of a
worse.
woman?
I w- yeah, I would say the doping, the two cis men with one doping
Hmm.
is versus the trans woman versus the cis woman. I would say the second the trans woman versus the cis woman is a way worse scenario.
Sure. I'm not talking about worse. I'm just talking about the structure. Like,
Oh,
because we would say maybe, oh,
um,
if you're doping and you're not allowed to, then that's you're breaking the rules, right?
right. So
Breaking
I
the
would
rules
say it would
more
be
or less, whatever. But you are breaking the rule, right? That's
it
the
would be
similar
the
structure.
doping analogy times 10. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Okay, so you would say that it still holds um, the athlete who says this person is, they must be doping. That if they
Yeah.
are doping, then they're cheating. It to whatever degree, that's fine. But like they are cheating, right? Would you
Right.
say that it's the case? Would you say that that's enough? I felt like, you know, somebody fights Mike Tyson for the first time, and they're just like, I felt like a child fighting a whirlwind, right? And they're like, he must be doping. Actually, maybe they were doping, back then. I don't know what
Yeah.
like boxing history, to that degree,
Yeah.
but like maybe everyone was dope. I don't know, but right. taking like a modern view
It's a
on it.
lot less
Um,
tested for back in the day.
yeah, yeah. But taking a modern
Yeah.
view, somebody has that experience fighting Mike Tyson, and you're like, oh, this is like, this is not just wow, you lost by a lot. This is like, actually, this fight was like unfair. It shouldn't have been this way. This is like, something at like a rule breaking level. Would you say that that
Yeah.
feeling like is valid to the degree that it's like
I,
substantive of that proves that this situation is not okay?
it has to be like the feeling. What we're not taking into consideration is this feeling is brought on by experience, right? So like this person had,
Well,
as I
so
mentioned,
just I mean, just
yeah,
to cut in, so somebody who's had 15 fights behind their belt, who's a world champion or something, and then fights Mike Tyson, right? Um, they have experience.
um, are you saying like all else being equal, like their weight class and everything
Yeah,
else, and then
yeah.
they fight
Presuming
Mike
it's not a
Tyson?
show match, it's like an actual,
Yeah, I
championship
mean,
match. Yeah.
Mike Tyson was very, I would say his skill level was just a lot higher
Mm-hmm.
than the average. It wasn't
Mm-hmm.
that he was necessarily bigger and stronger than everybody.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't, but it was his skill and his instinct that I think
Mm-hmm.
which made the difference in a lot of his
Yeah. He
fights.
was at especially good. I mean, I'm sure still is. Not at a
Not that he
championship
didn't
level, but
continue like
he's still
freight
alive.
train, yeah.
um,
He had
yeah.
power. Don't get me wrong.
Mm-hmm. But
Yeah.
I'm just asking, is it's like this. This feels like an argument that I feel like in general, almost everybody from left to right just wouldn't agree with. That it's like somebody's feelings about, this is unfair, make is enough to say that this is unfair. I feel like almost nobody will
Right.
agree with this argument. So I'm
What if they gave you a
um,
good reason why it's unfair?
sure.
What if it's not just a feeling of unfairness? What if
Okay.
it's like, no, I know what the rules are, and the rules say this is unfair?
Well, if the rules say it's unfair, but the people who are running the whole show, the refs, whatever, say it's not unfair, this is what
Hmm.
the rules say. Do you go with the player or do you go with the ref? I mean, maybe sometimes you say, "Oh, the ref got it wrong," right? Of course, you as the audience say
Right,
that. But are you saying like
right.
truly the final word is with the player in general, or is it with
Well,
the ref or whatever the organization?
the thing is that we just had this. It's like a new thing that just kind of entered, and we're just in foreign territory. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think that. I think organizations just don't want to feel the pressure of being the ones saying no to trans people
Sure, but now
because
you're speculating about why they feel that way, and
well,
you've moved away from what the argument actually is of does it always lie with the player to determine the rule if they have good experience, if they have a good reason and a good feeling, you would just always go with them
I would
rather
say
than
okay,
the
it's not
ref or whatever.
okay. It wouldn't just be with like what the rules say. It would just be this feeling of I'm a woman and I should only be fighting other cis women.
Okay, so
I would say
yes,
that's the feeling that
so I do feel like this is a kind of more specific situation than you're talking. It truly is something about I don't know woman's intuition or something in this particular circumstance that you go with in a way that you wouldn't go with in broader, more general circumstances with a similar structure. This is kind of a specific.
I'm just saying
So
without protecting. It's about protecting women's sports, right? Because
okay,
if a woman says I'm going to enter women's sports because I don't want to compete with men, they already have like
sure.
there's nobody saying no that they can't compete with men now, right? But they want if they want to
I'm not
make the
sure
choice.
actually. I
No, that's it's true. If you could,
across all sports leagues everywhere.
yeah, there's it's called the pro leagues, not the men's league.
Um, okay,
There's
I
no
would have I
actual
would have to
rule.
check that out, but that's yeah,
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there.
No, I'm just
Um,
saying, if you could find a woman that could stop LeBron James from scoring again
hmm.
ever, do you think she wouldn't be on the NBA or?
Well,
I mean, I think
she would
that
move to the men's team if she was really good. I'm not sure. I'm
no,
not I'm not a
if
huge
she went one on one against LeBron James and he could not do anything against her,
mhm.
she would be in the pro leagues tomorrow.
Hmm.
Like that's the way the pro leagues. They're just
Okay.
looking for the best players. They're not
Sure.
looking
Okay.
for.
So I'm going to give you what I would say is kind of a perfect counterexample for this, and then I'll give you your diagnosis because I've got to go in a bit. Um,
Okay. Could I
so
give you before, because I know you got to go, but
yeah.
I had an interesting anecdote I wanted to give you and see what you thought about it, from my esports experience.
Okay. Well,
So
let me do mine first, and then
sure,
you could do yours, and then I'll give you my diagnosis. Does
okay,
that sound good?
sure,
Okay. And I'll try to make it pretty snappy. Have you heard of the swimmer Leah Thomas?
sure.
Okay. Um, so there was another girl that she competed against who I think she tied with, who said this is really unfair. This is bullshit. I had to compete against a man. This is unfair, etc. Right? I'm sure
Right.
you know what I'm talking about. What
Yeah,
the
yeah.
story was. Right. Um,
Hmm.
so the question I think is if we're interested in moving a little bit away from just even within this anecdote of an anecdote. So within the anecdote of Leah Thomas as a swimmer, this anecdote of this one race. Let's at least move to the anecdote of this particular person, right? Um,
Hmm.
how would you describe um, the kind of um, like dominance within a division that Leah Thomas had, earlier as a swimmer on the men's team to then, transitioning and being a swimmer on the women's team. How would you describe like her kind of level of dominance, from one to the other? Like similar, massively, more on Laura's side, massively more on the other side.
Oh,
Like, how
I
would you
see.
describe that?
I kind of see where you're going with it, but I just don't. It's not the level of performance she's at is not really the issue for me. So that's kind of
Wait. Okay. Huh.
like how good she is. If Leah Thomas was like a terrible men's swimmer and then came over to women's and was still a terrible women's swimmer, I would still have the same issue.
Okay. So now I don't know what your position is at all because before you were
Oh,
talking about how having a man in women's sports is just it's
oh,
utterly
I
unfair.
was
It's
saying,
ridiculous. It's
yeah.
totally dominating. But now
I'm
you're
sorry, I forgot
saying
to,
it
from the
it it,
women's
it
view.
won't
That's from the
change.
women's view. I'm saying from the women are going to have their own opinion of it. I was just explaining like what the women's view looks like, and then when you asked me right now about Leah Thomas, I was
Mhm.
giving you my personal view.
But I don't understand how your personal view relates to any of your other views. Because if it's the fact that Leah
Well,
Thomas was not that strong as a men's swimmer and then not that strong as a women's swimmer, then I don't see what
well, that's not the
right.
case I was
Then
making
that's a
for Leah
counterexample
Thomas.
of your statement in general that you're
I
so
just don't think it's
it's
that.
it's a direct contradiction of you saying that there was a woman who felt like she had to compete against a man and that's obviously unfair and those
That
the
was that's I was just giving you the women's view of it, like how the women view it, on average when they have,
well I
because
don't want to
that's
hear
what
the
they're
women's view.
complaining.
I want to hear your view, right?
Oh,
That's the only reason
my
I would
particular
talk to you
view.
is to
Oh,
hear your
like
view, right?
so my particular view is going to sound a lot worse probably.
Okay, let's hear
Yeah,
it.
I just generally I just think they should be segregated by sex. That's it. I mean, I know that
Okay.
there's just obvious advantages, and that's just kind of that's another reason I kind of wanted to give you my little personal
Hmm.
anecdote. I even think that women have a disadvantage mentally, like in games that don't include any kind of physical anything. Like, so, as an esports gamer, you can imagine I saw very little women competing in fighting games, right?
Hmm.
Um, but the ones that do well and win at fighting games are trans women.
Hmm.
So, and like one time I went to Evo. It's like the biggest fighting game tournament. They have it in Vegas every year, and they had like a women's panel. And I look at the women's panel, and I don't recognize any of them, but I only recognize the one trans woman because she's the only one who ranked, like, can manage to rank in any of the games.
Mm-hmm.
And the other women were just kind of there because, you know, they get a lot of clout on Twitch or whatever, but they don't make like top 16 or top 8 in any of the games they play. Um, and so, what do you think about that? Why do you think only the trans women are doing well in like fighting games or things that are not, you know, it's not something that is physically demanding of you, but there's definitely a different, I think that shows or highlights a difference in mental ability as well.
And just to be clear, you're not saying the mental ability of females is inferior to that of men's. You're saying within some kind of
Well,
particular
different.
competitive
I
sports
wouldn't use
context.
the word inferior. The word inferior is too loaded. I would just say
Sure.
different.
Well, but you're saying worse but you're saying in this context, not in all contexts.
Performance wise, they just don't the differences between their brains for whatever reason just doesn't glom on to things like competitive
Sure.
fighting games. Yeah.
So women are less I don't know, less competitive in competitions is a weird way of saying it, right? But you're saying that females are less apt to perform well in competitions than human males, right? That's
In these
the general
competitions,
pattern
yeah.
that in these competitions, which span physical and mental,
And
right?
the usual counter argument I hear is because, oh, it's just because these environments are typically too hostile for women, but I would argue that they're more hostile for trans women,
Hmm.
and women, like cis women, are much more welcomed into those communities. Sure, they might get a little heckling and a little hate here and
Stalking
there,
and death threats.
but there's plenty of simping. I mean, there's plenty of simping, you know, that and that welcomes them right in to where they are much more welcome than like a trans woman would be, but the trans
Mhm.
women still outperform
Sure,
the
I
cis
see. I
women.
see. I see what you're describing. I have a lot of disagreements with what you're saying, but I don't think they're necessarily
Okay.
material to the main point of the argument. Um,
I
so
just kind of want to get your thoughts on it
yeah,
because that
yeah.
is,
So let me
yeah,
answer
those are
this
the,
in two ways, and then it's time for your diagnosis as I promised. Um, so um, there's one answer to this, which is when it comes to your argument, your argument, like using this as an example to say that this is why I hold this perspective, or this is why this perspective is valid. Um,
I could give you more examples, but
no,
this
no,
is
no,
just
no, no.
one I wanted
No,
to
that's
see.
fine. That's fine. That's fine. I'm just
Yeah.
responding to that within that context because I also have a slightly different kind of response to it. So within that context of trans women shouldn't be in sports. Men clearly seem to have an advantage. Um, I think you would need to make a more um, a some kind of statistical, at the very least, as well as probably causative argument, or something to demonstrate that this is the case, just generally, rather than any number of anecdotes. You would need some real analysis. And now to
So would
respond in
you?
a different way, I would say when it comes specifically to esports, I mean, I think the question of, are men and women equally interested in video games or something is not something that we can only look at the historical results and see. You've heard of like equal access, equal opportunity, right? These are different things. Or sorry,
Yeah.
equal outcome, equal opportunity. These are different things, right? That's a sentiment. I'm asking if you hold that sentiment or if that makes sense to you.
Say that again.
Equal opportunity
Uh,
and equal results, right?
equal opportunity and equal results. What about it?
Right. That it's like it's
Like I
admirable to have equal opportunity for everybody, but you shouldn't necessarily strive for equal results.
Oh, right, right, right. I would
right?
agree with that.
Okay. Um, so when it comes to, so you're saying there's unequal results. The thing that I would ask you to probably take a look at, looking at this really just more directly historically, answering that question, is it the case that, let's say, girls and boys have had equal access to video games, computers, etc.? If you look at advertising, if you look at just how toys are targeted, these are toys that were targeted towards boys versus like Barbies targeted towards girls. So it's not the case historically. And we could talk more some other time. I won't be able to talk about it right now. We could talk more some other time, whether or not you agree that
Yep.
that's the case. But that's what I would say is what you should look to. There's a difference there, and so the difference in outcome, if there's a difference in opportunity, the difference in outcome, the origin of that difference is therefore unclear, right? It's not straightforward to say because there wasn't equal opportunity. So now I do have to move over to diagnosis. I'm happy to talk a bunch more times. I've appreciated
Yeah, sure.
talking to you.
We could definitely have this conversation again. I was just going to say that, after I kind of analyzed that, I then looked across history through other games like chess and stuff like that, and
Mm-hmm,
tried to see who's the top 10 in all these categories, and it seems to
mm-hmm.
be men also. But I mean, we could leave that for
Yeah.
another time.
Yeah, no, we could
But
definitely talk
yeah,
about
thanks
that.
for the
So,
conversation.
my diagnosis of you, since you asked for it, otherwise I wouldn't. But since you asked, why do these conversations? I try to talk to lefties. It's not happening. Like I don't know what's going on in this situation. I think there are two things that I think are at issue with the way that you dialogue on this topic. I'm guessing, and it sounds like it's the case with most topics. And one of them is that um, use language when it comes to trans people is loaded in such a way that the conversation really needs to go to those things before you can even get into like other areas of the conversation or argument or debate or whatever. So this
Mm.
like saying that a trans woman is actually just a man. Things like that. That's an ideological, conceptual, linguistic, whatever difference that most people are generally not going to be so comfortable with keeping unresolved going throughout that debate. So or that conversation or whatever. So that's one aspect. The other aspect, I think you've got to take a look at your conversation style and see where you're missing um, um, a way to show active listening. So you asked me what my definitions of transphobia were, and then you said that it's hard to define, and then you talked about why other definitions didn't work. You gave me a very clear prompt. I gave you a very straightforward answer, but then you didn't engage with that answer. And in general, people are going to feel
Oh,
like, well, why am I even talking to you? If you're not going to respond to what I'm saying, you're going to
well,
talk
I'm
about what somebody
sorry.
else said. I'm not personally offended. I'm okay,
Can I clarify
engaging in that
what my
way. But
objective
but
was,
that's
though?
something that I think will definitely be an issue for you
Yeah.
in most
Well,
conversations.
I'm sorry you misread that, but my objective with asking for your definition was to make the point that it was harder to communicate to the average person.
Well, your point was that it's harder to describe transphobia than homophobia, and my
Sure.
claim was that it's exactly identically easy to define. And so,
And
so,
that's
so
that's
what
where
you
we had a
said
different.
wasn't in engagement with my response. And in general, people are going to feel like, well, why am I talking to you if you're not even responding to what I'm saying,
Mm,
right? So those two, and I think that latter one, even more so, is going to be the biggest stumbling block you're going to have in conversations. Thank you so much for tuning in. I've got to jump out. But yeah, I really, really appreciate you coming and talking. I found this very engaging. I
sure.
hope you found it
I'm
useful.
gonna
Um,
I'm gonna look through it. I'll rewatch it, and then I'll
yeah,
try to think
definitely.
if
And
there's
feel
a.
free, write a list down of like specific, questions or thoughts or anything you had.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah,
Maybe
I'd love to talk about
analyze
this
other
more.
topics. Yeah, you could analyze other topics that I go
Hmm.
over as well and see
Yeah.
what
No, that
you
sounds great. No,
problems there.
I love doing this kind of analysis. So thank you
Great.
for coming
Okay,
on
thank you.
and being a victim.
All right.
Have
Have a good one.
a good one. Take care.